meeting is being recorded.
Okay. I guess I need to get back to the beginning here. There we go. So welcome everybody. We're here with this program called Wisdom of the Pathwork Guide and Lectures from the Pathwork we're discussing. And this time we are taking a look at lecture number 136 that was delivered October 1st, 1965. And it's titled The Illusory Fear of the Self. So I don't know if anybody wants to check in before we kind of launch into the lecture, or anybody get a chance to read it, anybody need to say anything to arrive fully? Okay. So let's just go ahead and I do want to say, as I didn't have a chance to read this much before our class tonight, and I was like sort of taken aback. Wow, this is a lecture that I'm going to have to study because I'm not sure I'm following completely. And it felt like really important to me because it's speaking of some areas in my own being that I'm, still finding some struggle and difficulty with. So I welcome, other people's and understanding as we go. We all have different areas that more clearly or not. So, and sometimes the lectures are really clear and sometimes they're a little less so. Sometimes we're blind by our own blindness, which is basically what he's talking about in this lecture. So, yeah, so I'm going to begin to read. Welcome, Jacob.
I'm glad you said that, Darlene, because I started reading this lecture this morning and I don't know, it's like I hit a wall. I just felt like it was kind of thick and my mind didn't want to,
Yeah,
So I thought to myself, well, I'll just listen more intently tonight and see if I can get all.
Let's see if we can muddle through it. Yeah. It feels like it's both a little difficult in how he's describing it, but it's deep. So here comes Judy as well. So yeah, let's give it a shot, and then I think I'm going to spend some more time with this myself and see if I can penetrate it a little more. Welcome, Judy.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry I'm late.
We're just getting started and just commenting on, that this lecture is even a little difficult, so we'll see as we take it on if we can make some sense out of this. So he says, greetings, my dearest friends. Blessings for every one of you. Blessed be each and every step on your road to liberation and fulfillment. Your greatest joy and freedom comes when you give according to your potential. I think we can all maybe make sense of that, and feel the truth of that. Conversely, your greatest pain is not giving to life and to others according to your potential. All other pains and frustrations derive from the pain of not giving out what is within, just as all other satisfactions and pleasures flow from giving oneself to life without restriction. The refusal to give yourself freely, the involvement in a pattern of compounded pain, stems from your fear of your innermost being, the part of you that you do not yet fully know and acknowledge. Letting Dominique in. Got a good full class tonight. So any comments there? Does that make sense? Everybody can kind of relate a bit to at least this understanding of this fulfillment in the giving ourselves. And then he's saying here something about that, like a lot of times we find ourselves not feeling able to do that or holding back or, for various reasons. And he's saying maybe underneath all of those outer reasons, there is something around this fear of something within us that we've not yet fully known and acknowledged. And I had a session today even that, like was interesting how fear came up just out of the unknown, right? So if we don't know it, I think we also have fear. So as long as you keep part of yourself hidden, you cannot possibly be free. You then must constantly be on guard, and you must pretend. Therefore, where you harbor distortions, you live a lie, a needless lie, that you live because of a false fear of yourself. So here I think in many ways he's alluding to and referring to what we talk about the idealized self-image that is hiding, various parts of ourselves that we've rejected or we're afraid will be rejected by others, right? And so there's a kind of pretense and a guardedness, right, and defensiveness around, the free flowing of ourselves into the world, right? We hold ourselves back. It doesn't feel safe. And where there are, distortions and there's distortions even in our fear of that, right? Then we live a lie and a needless lie that you live because of false fear of yourself. So he's saying we really shouldn't fear ourselves. So, and I'll pause a little bit as we go. Feel free to chime in, interrupt me if I'm on a roll, if you need to. So, the fear of the self is the basic fear behind the fear of life, even the fear of death. Neither could the fear of others possibly exist without the fear of oneself. So does that make sense? I can kind of see how that works.
Aren't there different types of fears, Darlene? With the fear of others? Well, I mean, that could be physical fear or I guess some overwhelmed fear, but of course, I don't know how the physical fear would be fear of self, but anyway, I'm just an observation.
Yeah, I think, that mostly he would be talking about, like, I mean, I can make sense of it, like if I really feel okay about myself, like I don't fear others either. If they react, they react. If they like me, they like me. They don't like me, they don't like me. It's fine, right? And so, if somebody's gonna like confront me aggressively or something like that, and physically hurt me, I don't know. It's like a little bit of a different level. But I think he's saying again, that we're constantly creating. And so there would be, if that was happening, there would have to be some, level of, provocation or, reason to, have somebody responding that way. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, you kind of get what you put out type of thing. Yeah, okay.
But I do think, that at least I see, like most of our fear, like there is a way to do, maybe people don't see it so much inside themselves because we're so used to it and we also are hiding it, how much we fear our own self, our real self, coming out. Oh, we lost Paul somewhere in the mix. So let me just open that a minute. Do people recognize even any kind of fear of yourself as he names this basic fear that he's saying is within us all? Does it resonate? Do you find some part of your own self that you fear that you know of?
I
I
would
guess
say
the
yes.
fear of being discovered,
Mhm.
Go ahead, Judy.
the fear of being discovered in my mask, right? The fear that, I'm putting on a show and everybody knows it.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, I relate with that as well, Judy. And I guess, growing up, the feeling of being bad deep down, like, and so that very much was
Exactly.
a thing for me. So yeah.
Good. Uh-huh. Yeah, those are good examples, both of them. Anybody else?
Yeah. um, I noticed that there's a fear of looking at, I think the guy talks about this a little bit later, but looking at some of the dark aspects of ourselves and kind of facing emotions and just being with this kind of deeper nature. And that brings up some uncertainty or over identification with that. I've certainly experienced that myself.
Good, right. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very pervasive, and I think it's even sometimes more subtle than we know, like, I feel like in some ways I've overcome a lot of that fear, had a lot of it, but then I still see, little places where it still lives, so there's this, kind of basic question, I think, from the child within in some ways, like, are we okay, right? And then we know at some level that we harbor things that, like are a violation of spiritual law, right? And ultimately. And so then, that challenges that, so we have a fear that maybe we're not really okay, deep down inside as well. Because we are aware, even though we might try to deny or hide or whatever, that we also hold these negativities or resistances or, desire to cheat life, as the guide often points out, right? So he says it is exceedingly important now to discuss where your fear of self comes from and what it does to you if coddled instead of overcome. Like my way actually is a little more coddling than the guide's way, but both both do amount to overcoming, like, so he says fear of self can end only in self-alienation. It therefore cheats you of your birthright to be happy, free, unfolding creatures who give and receive in full measure. And I think this is important, like it's like this process, right? He's not talking about some end point where we, arrive or something, but there's this birthright that we have to be unfolding, right? And we give and receive and we have this happiness and freedom of being, lightness of being, like, and be, like we're sort of the opposite. We're so self-absorbed. We're so, worried about how we're showing up or all of this, right? It really robs us of this birthright. And as the inner processes become inverted, you lose contact not only with your innermost being, but also with the cause and effect within yourself, and with that inner mechanism that affords you relaxed self-government, and thus the capacity to build your life in a rewarding, realistic way. Being alienated from yourself because you are still unwilling to expose yourself, you come to a crossroads where you seem to be confronted with one good and one bad alternative. When you fear yourself, it is because in some way you cannot be what you want to be. So that's that idealized version of ourselves, right? What you want to be is an ideal which you pretend to be or to become. But this ideal is unrealistic and unrealizable because it is outside of yourself. And this is very important, like it's like it's a projection outside of ourselves that we're trying to live up to and achieve or become, right? And it's like it's not our real self. It's a projection from the real. So we really have to come back out of that projection, out of the outside of ourselves, back into the inside of ourselves and be who we are. So this ideal is sort of the apparently good alternative. If only we could be that, then everything would work out, or we would be safe, or we would get the love and attention we needed, or whatever. And the bad alternative seems to be that which we are at the moment. Right. And then our concept of our present self is also unrealistic because, again, we're kind of like, we're looking, I don't know if you remember in adolescence, but you used to look at your face in the mirror, and all you would see, you wouldn't see the whole, you would just see the different parts of it that were kind of standing out and not quite, perfect or normal or something like that. And our vision gets like that, right? we're sort of so focused on, our fear and wanting, so that there's this sort of exaggerated and distorted way that we even see, the real self. The, um, and the problem is not merely that your goal is unrealistic because it's better than what you can be, or that you see yourself now as worse than you actually are, right? That's what we're doing. What you judge unforgivably bad in yourself will no longer appear that way when it is out in the open and you understand cause and effect. So this feels really important to me too. Like, when we really can understand something and get the cause and effect, right? It doesn't, this judgment that we hold against our own self, where we feel it's unforgivably bad, no longer holds sway. We see the truth, and it sets us free from that self-judgment. And it may even be that, yes, there were there were imperfections or whatever, but in the understanding of it, it shifts things in a huge way, a very healing way.
Can I get an example of that? Because I'm not quite sure I understand what he's saying there.
So let me back up. Where were we reading here?
The cause and effect piece. It's like, well, when you understand that, then you'll get it all. But I don't understand that clearly. So maybe that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, good. So interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's like, and this is something that it feels like happens in my process when I am fully in the energy and the, opening in the experience of, something that I'm working with, right? Like maybe there is some way that I'm feeling ashamed of my child, or I did something screwy, or, like I'm feeling sort of my own inner judgment that's happening. And so I'm even going in and saying, okay, like this doesn't feel good. I want my freedom, right? And I got some heaviness on me or some judgment on me. And if I seek to know the truth, and if I go in and follow the patterns in my body of the energies, how it's held, releasing, following, inviting Holy Spirit in a way to lead, right? I often find myself, not even often, it's almost like, the process seems to happen this way, that, and it sometimes takes a while to stay with it. So that's the practice. But that it will take me to a place where all of a sudden it illuminates, like whatever I was working with, like lights up with this kind of clarity of, oh, that's what was going on, right? And there's this kind of, both at the same time, relief in the understanding and a total release of the grief and the pain that was held within the fear and the loss of that lack of understanding, right? So there it's like this, it washes through in this way, is how I experience that. And it comes, not through necessarily, again, an intellectual process, although I think, like if you truly could follow, to some degree, an intellectual understanding of cause and effect, it can help you, right? But this feels deeper, where, there's something that, we're touching, that got stuck in the inner child, in the programming way back then, and there's some way that's clearing, and like, and it comes out of this realization of who you really were, what was really happening, and the divine understanding of it. We read that other lecture a while back on the, I think it was last time, on the, many spiritual realms, and the guide was talking about the life review, and that's also one place where I hope that something similar will happen, that after we die, we can go to our life review, and begin to really, where we didn't understand cause and effect, see that. Because through my experience of doing that here, I really do feel like it's it's not what we fear, right? You know, like to face into, you know, those worst fears brings this healing. So, because we,
Excellent. Thank you, Darlene. Super clear.
okay. So your concept of your present self, I think we read that. So let's see. So let's start with what you judge unforgivably bad in yourself will no longer appear that way when it is out in the open and you understand cause and effect. And conversely, when you give up the inner lie, you will discover negative trends in yourself and you will understand more deeply their undesirability. And this also happens, but it's not with this guilt and badness, right? You know, like you're willing to take some responsibility and see the truth, and even knowing that you may not be able to change it right away. And he gets into that in this lecture some too, you know, that you can still align with your intention, right? And your willingness and your recognition, self-recognition, you know, to what you desire, what you want, right? And so when we're, you know, sort of unconsciously wanting to hide, then all of this gets lost. Conversely, when you give up the inner lie, you will discover negative trends in yourself and you will understand more deeply their undesirability without, however, feeling diminished by your awareness, right? Whenever you are crushed by what you are or fear what you are, you have no realistic perception of yourself. And similarly, your idealization of yourself, when investigated closely, often proves less desirable than it seems. A flat, unliving quality constricts both the good and the bad alternatives and thus deadens the rich life substance. A negative chain reaction is triggered by your refusal to give up the inner life and look at your whole self. And by inner life here, I guess he's talking about the sort of self-absorption or something into, you know, like the idealized self-image and our lack of living it, right? You know, and see all of us, right? Because that's just this real narrow, restricted place that we live most of the time. And so the first link in the chain reaction is this narrow choice, seemingly between good and bad, which forces not only the self, but many other aspects of life into the same narrow mold. So, you know, like our way of seeing ourself as either good or bad, right or wrong, you know, and then it projects out into everything in life so that this is duality, right? Every issue turns into duality, a narrow either or choice. The choice is impossible to make because even the so-called goodness is problematic. Since the ideal has always been unrealistic, it becomes unattainable, even undesirable. You know, like, and he goes into this a little more, but you can kind of see, like, when it becomes unattainable, like we still kind of, we want it, and yet, you know, then we don't want it, and there's an inner split. You know, that's what kind of happens with these splits, is that we tend to fracture like marbles in all directions after the first one. And so the whole of life, starting with the self, seems to be divided between a rigid, sterile good and a flatly bad alternative. The self cannot feel at ease in either. Both are a strain and feel distinctly unreal. And then the next link in the negative chain reaction. So, and there's lectures that he has on these, you know, like chain reactions. He calls them vicious circles. So is this, and it's a chain reaction in following self-alienation, which is trying to live up to our idealized image, is that these apparently good and bad alternatives turn into two equally undesirable alternatives. a little repeating there. However, it is important that you see it in sequence. When you feel you are confronted with two equally undesirable alternatives, your sense of truth and beauty is distorted. You know, I used to use this as a good clue, right? To really see when when I must be in not truth, right? Is when I was sort of damned if I do, damned if I don't, right? Because that's what this kind of split feels like. And whenever whenever you find yourself in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, you gotta go to this. You gotta know that you're not in reality. Your sense of truth and beauty is distorted, and even the most desirable aspects of life turn sour or hold elements in them that you may feel as undesirable, although you may also feel that you ought not to feel them as such, right? So we just, keep tightening the noose. A typical and important example of this state is the dichotomy between desire and fulfillment. So now he goes into this very specific kind of example. And again, it gets a little dense and deep here. So let me know how you're doing. We'll see if we can make some sense out of it. It's a very beautiful thing, when you think about, this thing with desire and fulfillment, right? And so in health and truth, these two aspects become one. That what we desire, we know is potentially, is possible, and that the fulfillment, is, maybe in the desiring of it, right? I can remember when I was very early in the pathwork, right? I had this deep, deep feeling of sort of desire, or what I would used to call unrequited longing, right? This longing for something more that I don't know what it even was, and it was this kind of, it was this desire and fulfillment, but it was in this kind of division where I would feel the desire, and almost immediately with the longing, with the desire, came the hopelessness, came the, feeling that I wouldn't have it. So the feeling was blended in that way. My desire was automatically, not fulfilled. And there was a lot of pain and suffering in that for a long time, and it took a while to penetrate. But I think that's a lot of what he's talking about. Do you guys recognize that kind of in yourself in any way? How are you doing with your desire, and do you really believe in its fulfillment, right?
I think I may have just had sort of an epiphany about this. It seems to me that this has something to do with the image, like the false core image. So maybe I should deal with my image. My false core image was I am not enough. So naturally there's this desire to be enough. But if I was suddenly seen as enough, I wouldn't know how to handle it. So it would be equally uncomfortable to have the desire and the fulfillment.
Good example. Yeah. I think he even mentions, that. And so, and maybe in other ways too. So does anybody else have another example, or,
I guess what came up for me was just this picture of having the desire, and that immediately reinforcing and reminding of what we are not. Wanting it is like, if we want it to be, instead of it being a want and then creating a positive belief in its fulfillment, we say, oh, I long for, and then it's a reminder that we don't have what we long for. And then instead we shoot out the negative psychic points that begin a negative spiral and take us down into hopelessness instead of up into the manifestation. So like a no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's vibrational, and exactly like, when we we doubt, or we somehow have the image that the very longing that we have, I can imagine maybe people in the, were as children maybe not supported that much, have the, a great longing for support, but at the same time, like you're saying, Frank, an image that says, like, well, nobody's ever gonna come to and help you, and so, the longing for support is automatically, like painful because it brings up that it's never going to happen. And
Yeah,
so
I would say that even when my image is negated and people treat me or make me feel like I am enough, I still put on some kind of mask to cover up the fact that I can't actually hold that.
No, I hear you exactly. I get that too. There's this thing in some ways, right? That in leadership sometimes, I feel challenged by like of stepping more fully into sort of that, authority, or even, like there's some people that I know in leadership that, the guide says we have to visualize for growing into the future. And I see them in sort of their elegance, their higher self, radiating through. And I like that and I want that, but at the same time, I feel like, oh, if I stepped in, so this is some of the shame of the higher self, right? Like if I couldn't hold it, or people, like, would see through it in some way or something like that, right? So exactly. So we have these ways that we're, struggling to affirm within ourselves healthy desire, right? And that's where he goes. He says, healthy desire is a relaxed expansion, a reaching for ever new possibilities and fulfillment. In distortion, the desire becomes frustration. So, and I used to deal and still do somewhat with frustration, right? So desire and frustration is an interesting combination to connect with. And they appear the same in the psyche and are therefore unwelcome. So if, again, desire is met continuously with the belief that it's not going to be met, then every time we have a desire, we're going to feel frustrated. Right? And frustration is not a fun feeling, right? It's not a good energy. So similarly, in distortion, fulfillment turns into satiation and stagnation, and kind of a dead-end street. And this one I was less connected with, but I think I understand what he's saying, right? That, and in some ways, like, if we arrive, if we have it, it's like an end goal, right? It's not a moving, growing, evolving kind of ever unfoldment sort of thing. So when we, believe that where we're trying to get is some end goal, maybe we have a goal and we achieve it, we get our new car or whatever, and now we've got our new car, but then, so what after a while or something like that, it doesn't really, or it feels great, but it's like, again, it won't take us where we're really, the real life is trying to be lived from. So when the self is no longer feared, neither desire nor fulfillment need to be feared. For the self then knows that desire will be fulfilled, and fulfillment will not be an end, but a new beginning. Distorted and disconnected from the real self, one's outlook is so negative that the fulfillment of desire is inconceivable. So this is when we're self-alienated, when we're trying to become something we're not, right? And we think that fulfillment is in denying the real self and trying to achieve, or live up to, or, project this other ideal. And it's like, in that place, it really is fulfillment of desire is unconceivable. And so even healthy desire is rejected. The person in the state withdraws from desiring. As a compensation, the soul then strains in self-willed greed, right? So we flip-flop again, this is the hanging on the cross thing, like, so we're deprived, we hang, we reject our desire for as long as we can, but desire is a part of life, right? It's like, and so, then the next thing, we're doing is we're feeling so much desire because we're, pushing it down that it becomes greed, and we end up, like with some kind of self-willed forcing current, right? That from the conviction that fulfillment does not exist, and that as a natural part of life, but must be fought for and grasped, right? So we have to go out and make it happen. And so this is a part of, like again, this way that we keep bouncing between the sides of duality. Convinced that fulfillment is impossible, you cannot dare to desire. When you do not desire freely and openly, which is possible only when you meet yourself equally freely and openly, frustration is indeed inevitable. So I'm going to pause here, like meeting ourselves freely and openly. I think this is something similar to what I've been, calling people to, of befriending themselves, right? But in a way, this is a nice description, like, because again, when we're meeting ourselves from the judgment of the idealized self-image and the bar that we're measuring, and the kind of forcing current where we, we're trying to make ourselves be a certain way and mad at ourselves when we fail, like all of that, right, is hardly freely and openly to meet ourselves. And I think that's somehow with heart. So just notice, where you are in your process, in your journey, of being able to even appreciate yourself and know yourself enough, know all of yourself enough, right? Not just your faults, not just what you judge, but, the whole picture, that where you can really truly meet yourself freely and openly.
Arlene, isn't that a process, though, that is totally outside of our control? Meaning that for me, the best I can do oftentimes watch my judgmental self and observe it, but then moving direct, and now I'm going to move into the freely, and no, it just doesn't work that way, at least for me, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think, it's a process, right? So when we notice that we're in judgment, it is kind of like the question of, well, how do we move from that place back into freely and openly? And I think you can, it's like, it doesn't have to take, you can do it in a meditation process, I think, depending on, what you're working with and the degree of difficulty of the situation. But, there's a way where, like when you're saying that you're in that state of judgment, right? One of the things that you can do is meet that part of you freely and openly, right? So what happens when you notice, like you said, the one thing you can do is be aware of it, right? So, and that's good, but it's like, how is that awareness? How is it flavored, tinted? Is it, like sort of maybe just a slightly judgy, or can it really be freely and openly?
Yeah,
See,
I understand what you're saying. I just can't, it's difficult for me to move from the judgment into freely and openly.
so part of it is not saying move there yet. Part of it is I'm saying, like feel the choice, because that's where he's going next, right? It's not about, seeing and doing it somehow with our outer will and making it happen. It's like seeing and choosing what we truly want, what we truly desire, right? Because we're seeing what we're doing, clearly, and also we're not rejecting what we're doing. We're not rejecting ourselves because we're doing it, because that we see, and it's so easy then to just make another idealized self-image, like, oh, that's bad, you should be someplace else, you should, so we have to, like we see ourselves judging, and then we judge our judging, right? We keep going behind. So we have to, just be with, and that's being open and free in some way, right? Is, oh, here I am in my judgment, and I'm, noticing that, and if we can, like see, like, how does that feel? Right. And what's going on, even the judger, right? How does it feel inside to be the judger and to be the judged? Because the more that we can again experience the feelings and make the connection between cause and effect, the greater the power of choice that we have. So hold the question. I think the guide continues to go into this, but I understand what you're saying, and it is the hard part, and we get confused because we feel like it should be some kind of outer will, and you're right about that. It doesn't happen through the outer will, but there is a way that we can work, I think, with the inner will and with the being just present with what is in, maybe it's like, well, why won't you be open and free, right, with yourself? What's the resistance? Explore that. Welcome the truth behind that. What would be the worst thing that happened if you let go of your judgment? So I'm trying to remember where we are here. He's saying partial fulfillment does occur even in the distorted inner state. And why does it then inevitably turn into satiation? So this is where, when we get partial fulfillment, that's where it kind of feels like it's not really what we want. It doesn't have that vibrant remaining, life force with it, which can remain only when the being is open and free. Then all cosmic energies vibrate in the eternal now, where there is no end to bliss, and where all universal forces grow and unfold. Who did we lose? So I think this is getting into a little bit of, kind of metaphysical and cosmic energy sorts of understandings, but I think it's always useful to try to follow a little bit. So he's saying that there's something, about understanding that the truth, and this is how I like to use it, when he goes into these places, is that this is the truth. And if I can use that to kind of compare where I'm stuck or where I'm lost, it helps, at least I can even ask, well, how can I get from here to there or whatever? So it's Jacob. Okay. So it's like all cosmic energies vibrate in the eternal now. This is the truth. And in that eternal now, there is no end to bliss. And can you imagine then, like, if you were open and you were available and you were free, you would be sort of a part of these cosmic energies, in this vibrational state, right? And in some ways that really is, a blissful state, right? A fullness and a moving, if we don't have fear about it or we don't have resistance to it. It flows through us, and it's a sense of streaming, and there's a sense maybe of guidance or, sense of, what we want, where we go next or what we want to do next. And it kind of is in a flow. And so this is also where the universal forces are continually growing and unfolding. So it's like they're never perfect. They've never arrived, right? It's always ongoing. And so this is, the next place, but there's more, and it's not like there's an end to this and there's an ultimate goal. So when the soul is even partially shut off, it is rigid, and the vital energies cannot reach the secret chamber. Since the self is felt as finite and not as infinite, every activity has a beginning and an end. In finiteness, fulfillment is a flat, accomplished end and must become a burden. It also appears futile, leaving a confused feeling of what for, a feeling that there is no sense to anything, if even fulfillment, or even if fulfilled desire turns sour. So some of you may kind of recognize some of this, like, like not having a sense of what your life purpose is for, or, what you're trying to get to, or, and it doesn't feel like anything really calls you or is that enticing, doesn't have a sense of purpose behind it. So for the soul in truth with itself, and thus with the universe, fulfillment is a vibrant, unending, deeply satisfying continuum, and therefore cannot be feared. And again, like I said, I don't resonate so much with this, fear, but some of you may. So if anybody wants to speak to this, but he's saying that there is this, this fear of sort of the even fulfillment isn't, is a dead end, and so why even struggle for it? In the distortion, you fear desire no matter what happens. You fear it when it remains unfulfilled because the frustration hurts the soul, and you fear it when it is fulfilled, for the psyche then does not know what to do with it. You fear and reject both desire and fulfillment to the degree that you fear your own hidden self. I think Frank also was giving us an example of that. So only when you are no longer alienated from yourselves will you live in that vibrant experience where desire is never painful, and therefore where desire and fulfillment become one as you become one with yourself. A further chain reaction of self-alienation is losing oneself in the illusion that one cannot determine what goes on in the self, believing oneself helpless in the grip of one's feelings, attitudes, thoughts, or actions. And this is where, it's kind of like it connects a little bit to my study, because I see these places where I literally feel like, I'm so unconscious of it, I'm not aware when it's happening. And so I'm not quite clear how, like, I do feel helpless in the grip of it. When you fear that your negative emotions are going to control you, you forget that you have something to say about it. You ignore the fact that no act or thought can exist without your allowing it. So there's some self-responsibility it's pointing to that I may want to look at a little more, like, and then he says, your apparent lack of self-government is an illusion. How often you exclaim that I feel thus and thus, as though this were all there was to it, and this prevailing attitude makes any way out impossible. Now, I think here he's saying something a little different than what I'm saying. Here, I've seen this in often in the mind, right? The mind works that way. So we notice we're feeling thus and thus, and we even like wonder, like, well, why is this so? But we don't really explore it, right? It just seems like that's the way it is, and so it's like a kind of end of discussion. It doesn't even get us curious, that we're thinking that way. It's just such a set belief, and that kind of closes doors for us to do this inner exploration. So it's good when we kind of notice, and when we can wake up to sometimes our belief structure around our feelings, right? Or around our ability to change, or as part of what you were saying, Dick, like I don't know how to make this change, right? It's like, and he's saying it's not about making it, but let's continue a little further and let him answer. So he's saying, that we simply do determine our thought, feeling, and action, but not always consciously, right? So we also determine even how we want to feel and react. And I think this is very true that we are, but it's like, what part of us, right? So this is where, when I hear this, sometimes I get confused, and I'm thinking, like, oh, well, my conscious self, is doing it, and I need to control it with my conscious will or something. I don't think he's quite saying that. He says this self-determination is not a superimposition, which is what the outer will is, right? Or a self-deception when you fully meet yourself. Since you then know what you really feel, you can desire and determine to feel differently. So this is where, instead of going right to the outer will and I should be different, right? there's a step that we're missing here. And he's describing it here. So when we know what we really feel, we can feel like, well, is that what I really want? And then, we can get in touch with that part of us that may truly desire from a deeper place, not from the outer superimposed should, but from the deeper choice and free will desire, right? Oh, I do want something different, right? And it may be that you don't even know how to make it happen. Then it's not about that. It's only about seeing that there is a choice in that moment and making that choice from the heart about what you want, your desire, and seeing what you've been desiring in a sense, and seeing that there's a choice in that moment. And then I think things can unfold in a different way, like through this larger cause and effect that is in process from our higher being, right? So he says this desire has its effect when it comes to your choice of action or your attitude toward what you find in the hidden chamber of your psyche. You need not even wait for an effect. You can immediately determine whether to give in to resistance and act destructively, or choose constructive ways which call for meeting yourself and determining your course. Now here, I think I would nuance it a little bit, right? But I get the similar vein, right? And in some sense, what we want to do is again, go to that choice, right? And see, we may even say, oh, I have to get, I'm stuck. I'm going to give in to my resistance, right? And we watch ourselves give into the resistance. But even when we do that, we can still in our hearts pray and make a choice. Help me, God. I really don't want that. That's the best I'm doing right now. That's all I know right now. But I choose deeply, deeply. I really want something else. So I think when we're, like choosing from that deep inner intention and praying, and then just, being aware and the work that over time we will find our way in and be liberated from that destructiveness. And he says we can be instantly liberated by desiring that which is most constructive at this particular moment of your life. And there have been times when I've gotten that deep and I've, shifted it right then. But most of the time it's like penetrating a little bit of a fog within us, to get to that place. And so I think that, just really, trying to find, not worrying about, like an instant liberation, but just the truth of your inner choice. And he says, but to arrive at a constructive desire is possible only when you know what and who you are. So that's the other thing. When we are identified with our negativity, it's really hard to desire a constructive, desire. So part of it is that we have to, awaken the higher self. We have to recognize, our divine part of our nature, right? And when we know that, we are a spark of God, we do want goodness, right? That's what the prayer is. That's what our inner intent is revealing and showing, and so that, helps us see and know who we really are, right? But then if we keep destructive part of ourselves separated or secret or hazy and vague, the relevant constructive desire will not even be known to you. And in a part, he's saying, rather than, choose, I don't want something, right? He's saying we have to come to a place where we're choosing love instead. We're choosing something that we want. So if it's judgment that's there, like what do you want? And sometimes I think it's interesting because I've heard this, that really judgment is, what is that term? It's really like longing, that's not happening. So, we judge it, but if we can transform the desire, behind the judgment and just feel the longing and like I want to be less judging, or I want to be more loving, right? So any comments here? I've been going on for a while. Did I lose
Well,
everybody?
I can jump in always on this area because this is, and I'll just kind of expose it here, but my self-judgment and beating myself up is such a lifelong process that it's so habitual. But thanks to the, and I always thought the way to get through that is beat myself harder for beating myself up. It's just a continuous vicious circle. And Pathwork is certainly shifting that now, that where I'm at now. And I still do this with like a home repair work, and I'm dropping a screwdriver when I'm on a ladder, or well, damn, why can't you hold on? I go into this automatic self-beating, and where I'm at now, and I'm aware, I catch it pretty quick, but that doesn't mean it disappears. So, so two things. One is I can say, oh, well, then I'm just going to kind of let myself be critical of myself. Now, I mean, that may sound strange. It does to me, but actually it takes some of the energy away.
Mhm.
So it's a way, I think, of accepting myself for the way I am right now.
Yeah,
In a
exactly.
bizarre, that just doesn't fit my old logical mind. And then somehow it starts to shift, and then it starts to take the energy starts out of it. And the other is, I mean, Liam Quirk is very much into look at what your ultimate desire. Every negative thing has ultimately a good intention under it. And my good intention under it is just be accepting for life for what it is, accepting myself for my flaws or not flaws, or just accepting my life as it is. That is the intention under it, and being at peace with it. But I can see that, but that doesn't mean everything's going to change instantly. It's definitely a process that's slower than I like, and I have to allow that too. And just kind of
Right.
one step at a time. Yeah.
It feels to me literally like we're deprogramming every cell in our body, right? It's like we've been, we've programmed, we live in this matrix and we're programmed in these ways, and we're awakening out of that, but we just, really have to, it's like you said, a slow. And one of the things that I would add to, part of what you're talking about, I think, Dick, is the one thing I haven't heard is like, so the voice of the judger, right, is also a child. Do you realize that?
Well, it's been with me since I was a child, so that would make logical sense. Yeah.
And what, it is that ISI, but the guide is saying, that's kind of like the slightly older child trying to become our authority to protect us and save us and take care of us, right? And it's basically, afraid somehow that if we're klutzy or we're not perfect in the way that it says, that we're not going to be okay, right? So if we can go in and hold that fear, it's another fear of the self, right, that he's talking about. So the idealized image has a fear of ourself, and then it tries to control and control with judgment.
Yeah, the fear, I mean, that pops up as you mentioned, that is fear of not being acceptable to others.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, I'm not acceptable to myself, so it's kind of a perverted way of looking at it.
Right, but that's often first where we learn, the child desperately needed to be acceptable to others, right? And so rather than calling it perverted, see if you can have compassion, right? It's
No,
like,
no, I'm saying that objectively.
Okay.
I'm not critically. Okay.
Okay, all right, yeah, because it is, it's like it's really just, a younger part of us doing the best it can. The judge, the critic, the ISI, it's really a younger part of us doing the best it can to try to help us survive. And at some point, we have to realize that it doesn't work very well. There's a better way, right? And then we can help both of those inner children that are, kind of at war with each other, right? and you know, they're both siblings in a way, right? So we can go in there, you know, as the authority now, as we're seeing this, you know, and begin to sort things out.
I could see the one inner critical child. What's the other one?
Say that again.
Well, you said there's two children.
With both
working
children,
with
you know, the top dog and the underdog, right? So the critic is trying to control the one that's unacceptable, right, and make it acceptable, you know, but they're both children, and they feel. I mean, you know, it's all about how you're slicing the pie. So you know, it's like not, but I often feel like when I'm in my critic, I'm feeling both the judgment, and I'm also feeling crappy inside because I feel judged. And it makes me unhappy and have no energy and no desire to do anything, right? You know, and so I got, you know, the split going on inside of me where one part's beating on the other part, and I'm feeling, you know, the negativity of both.
Interesting way to look at it. Thanks.
So good examples though. Yeah. And so, so suppose you find hate or hostility in yourself and you fear its effect on you and your actions. And this is an interesting, you know, prayer or affirmation that he gives. So I'm going to try to work with this right away. It didn't strike me, but I think there's something here. So let's read it again and see. So simply state, I shall fully face these destructive feelings, which will not force me into actions, for I am master over all feelings. I determine actions. I determine what I want to do, think, and feel. So this I think, is coming from sort of this I am, you know, inner self a little bit, and not from the little ego. I now that wants to control us, right? I now want to see what is in me, and I desire and intend to change these emotions into truthful and constructive ones. I choose my attitude to meet these emotions. If I encounter an inner distaste for giving up such destructive feelings, I shall neither deny this inner refusal by repression, nor give into it. I shall meet this too, and not be vanquished by it. I determine truth in myself, and I choose constructive ways. So how did that land? Anybody want to speak to that?
I get this instant feeling of a forcing current going on there. So
Yeah. So that's the trick with it. It's so easily are we tempted to go into the outer will instead of the inner will, and the outer I making ourselves do it, than the inner longing and choice and desire, right? And I think a part of it is, you know, like these words like master over all feelings and things like that, you know, it's like when we do that from the little ego, yeah, you know, so we have to shift. This is a prayer that's speaking from the I am self.
Darlene, to me, it's inspiring to hear that voice resonating in me beyond the parts of me that, you know, play in the more distorted kind of realm. So when I hear that and I kind of repeat it as I'm listening to it, I feel a sense of courage and power, and this kind of a waking that, oh, right, I am in charge. And those words just resonate on such a true level that all of those other thoughts and feelings are not as real as what I am saying now, basically, where I'm echoing that sentence. So even if I guess it can be coming from a more forceful place, there's just so much more truth to that, inherently emotionally to me, that goes beyond those other parts that are almost like I don't know, they go into hiding when they hear from that place. Like they can't stand up. Like there would be little children trying to overpower like a grown man kind of thing, you know. It's just really interesting feeling I get.
Cool. Yeah. And I think that, there is the sort of like that, our inner authority in that. And it's speaking the ultimate truth, right? And so, the guide is always saying when we're lost in our stuff, right, to ask, what is the truth? Is this the truth, right? And so this truth is always like a really beautiful, way of, aligning and knowing where, kind of out of where we're in the distortion, right? When we question it, right? And then we recognize the guide speaks these things in many different ways, and he's always saying that inner reality, is, and the ultimate reality is, this other thing where we are, totally responsible, where we are ultimately, our own inner one authority, right? Connected to the ultimate divine space. And it is, like what we really want in our deepest nature, right? That's where I think we ultimately can feel identified with it, right? Whether you can feel, empowered completely yet in that, see if you can feel that it's the truth of what you want.
I think something that came up to me in this was the noticing that in some of the recent lectures I've been reading, it's been very illuminating around how much us feeling these feelings is part of the work or really is the work. It's like through feeling the feelings that are coming up in all of these situations that are unique for each of us, and some of them are probably the same. The actual sitting and feeling is like part of what does the alchemy and dissolves them. And so when I think about that and what this is saying, it's like, oh, it takes a little bit of a different turn when you think about when we encounter our darkness, our lower self, or behavioral patterns, because it's almost like I could finally understand, looking at those things as an opportunity instead of as a
Yeah.
hardship. It's kind of like, oh, here's the work. But I didn't understand that before.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's kind of like, the ego story, like it feels like it's the problem, right? Instead of the opportunity. And we get identified with that, achievement or what's wrong, trying to perfect. And it's not that there isn't some divinity in that, right? Some, natural growth factor in our being that wants to always expand and grow and improve and learn, right? That's who we are. That's our very nature, right? We don't have to make ourselves do that, which is kind of the confusion of the ISI. So he says, such determination is the first step back from self-alienation. It is the way to achieve relaxed and truthful self-government rather than strained superimposition, the forcing current, the will, the making ourselves, the punishing ourselves when we do it wrong. This deep inner decision can be made at any moment, but you labor under the illusion that you cannot help feeling as you do or even thinking and acting as you do. Acting includes attitudes, such as the determination to remain passively controlled by resistance or negative emotions. So, and again, it's like, not to judge it, but to know it. I mean, oftentimes, we get in our work and like, all I can feel is my resistance, and the guide says that's our divine free will, our right to say no. So say no, bring it out, move the resistance, explore that, go deep into that. Don't be controlled by it, but don't try to get rid of it, or force it out of the way. Go into it, learn from it, right? So you labor under the illusion that you are at the mercy of what you feel, think, and will. But this is the way I feel, you say, setting a period after this as though this were all there was to it and nothing further could be done. And that's what I'm saying, yeah, go explore it, right? Don't just in the conversation there. You wait for some miracle from outside to make you feel differently. It does not occur to you that you first must want to feel differently before you can come out of the trap. So where we are in our negative identification and our resistance, right? Again, we have to make ourselves change that. But to realize, that there is a choice. And so how can we, go in deeper to see what we really want? And if you do not want to feel differently, you must know that you do not want to, instead of deceiving yourself with the pretense that you want to but cannot. Once you know that you do not want to feel differently, you can find out why you want to remain in a negative, undesirable state. And there's always a reason. I mean, this is the interesting thing, this is where the cause and effect gets clarified, right? And when we see it, then oftentimes it's like we recognize, well, that really is not doesn't work so much, but it's in the unconscious, right? And so we have to put the two and two together. So by denying the truth that you can choose your attitudes, thoughts, and actions, you lose the greatest power at your disposal, self-government. You confuse this, my friends, with a false control you constantly exert over your guards to keep the secret part hidden. Every vestige of the energy is geared to controlling your secret self. When you misapply your energy, you lose control over that part that could determine a fruitful, constructive, expanding life. Imagine that you must keep a part of yourself secret. Imagining that you must keep a part of yourself secret comes from not believing in your real self. Yet as long as you do not commit yourself wholeheartedly to exposing that which you fear, you cannot convince yourself of your innermost being, which is utterly trustworthy, wise, and good. So this is very important here, right? You're getting this? It's like we want to hide, right? But we can never really trust ourselves until we expose what's hidden. And then when we do that, then we recognize our deeper inner depth of who we really are. Your fear, first of all, is your suspicion that there is no reliable, rich aspect of your inner being from which you can nourish, from which you can draw. Therefore, you fear, and if we feel like we're not, we don't have this divine resource within us, right? Like what can we draw on? It's like we feel empty. We have to get it from other people, right? It's like, so not knowing that connection it's like we're really bereft. Therefore, you fear that the ultimate in you is the part that hates and nurtures destructive wishes and desires. Because when we're empty, it's hard to feel gratitude, or, it's hard to, we feel jealousy, we feel envy, we feel greed, right? And we begin by hiding it from others, but end up hiding it also from ourselves. And then we lose contact with our whole self. All of you must comprehend this mechanism thoroughly and discover the means you resort to when you make believe that you are honest with yourself all the way, thereby letting go of the last vestiges of control over the secret in you and meet yourself for what you are. That was a little bit of a convoluted sentence, but I think we got it. Let me try it one more time. All of you must comprehend this mechanism thoroughly and discover the means you resort to when you make believe that you are honest with yourself all the way. So, and by discovering those means, right, and discovering that we're not honest with ourselves all the way, we can let go of the last vestiges of control over the secret in us and meet ourselves for what we are. Only then can you get down to the serious business of self and of living. And I think this is really true. Like, until we break through this dynamic in us, right, the ability to grow and to, find that place it's limited. And, it happens, of course, but it's like, then we do have the freedom. And then we really feel like, okay, now the work begins, right? Because I'm no longer hung up on all of this stuff over here. So when I say serious business, I mean this in the positive sense of discovering the ultimate in yourself, which you do not have to hide once you know it. As long as a part of you remains in hiding, you live by proxy, as it were. It is always as if. It is never whole and real. Then all goals and fulfillments are, in a sense, make-believe. And I mean, I've lived this way, right? And it's incredibly empty and frustrating. And everything that you do achieve, like, I mean, if you finally get somebody to love you or attracted to you because your idealized self-image is, polished and shiny, like they start paying attention, and you secretly know they don't even know me, right? They're just responding to this glitter that I'm showing. And so you can't take in the connection. It's not real. The great human struggle for life or death is as illusory as death itself. For no matter how many destructive, undesirable facets you may find in yourself, your fear of them is based on illusion. So, like, we have all this destructiveness, it's like, but there's no, it's like, we don't need to be afraid or ashamed, right? And the fear of them is what builds up more fear, more guilt, more pretense, more neuroses, and therefore more loss of healthy control over that in you which can be controlled, namely what you desire to think, feel, and do, the inner direction you take. And since you and life are one and the same, they cannot be different. You can fear life only to the exact extent that you fear yourself. And I have to work with this myself, because like, that kind of caught me, and I realized, there's places where I still have a lot of fear of life, so I want to look more deeply at how that connects. You can fear others only to the extent that you fear yourself. You can fear nothing if you do not fear the part of you that you keep secret even from yourself, or half so. You can easily find the vague feeling of hiding something if you set out to do so. But you jealously defend the secret, and in this defense you alienate yourself more from the vital, live energy and meaningful presence within yourself that alone can inspire you and guide you to fulfillment. You thus make yourself uselessly and needlessly unhappy. So this fear of self, and as I look into that, I mean, I'm not sure, what part I'm still hiding, right? But I'm gonna trust that maybe there's still something in there. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a mask, but I think that's probably probably not fully true. Maybe there's different levels of mask. I do feel like I did kind of go through a breakthrough, that is this lecture is about, and it truly does shift into what I would say is the phase 2 of the pathwork, right? That the guide speaks of in 204. So he says, you must pretend that you do not believe in the existence of that part in you which you have every reason to trust. This, my friends, is a very subtle pretense, right? So, do we find in ourselves, like, the part that we have every reason to trust is our real inner being, our higher self, our essential nature, right? And, like, are we pretending that we don't believe in the existence of that part? Does that make sense? Can you find that in yourself? I mean, in some ways, we must, because I think we may not recognize it very well, and we're kind of conditioned to deny it or not look for it, or to, make a big image out of it and not make it real. And we're afraid to believe in the existence of that in us. But what is life? How could we be here? It's like there's a way, I think, that we could meditate on that a little bit and see if you can penetrate into a deeper place where you really do understand that you have this spark within. And it's not just an intellectual knowing, right? The guy talks so often about that, but we have to feel it, and your heart is a good place to seek it out in, right? The many chambers of the heart. So he says it somehow seems easier to doubt your vital energy than to admit your fear of your secret and give up the lie of your life. Even if that lie exists only in a small part of your being, its pervading effect is that somehow everything seems a lie. Even that which you are truthful about. Your very being alive can only be a truthful phenomenon when there is nothing to hide, when you make the great decision not to be ruled by your negativity, regardless of what emotions, thoughts, and desires you secretly harbor. If you state and restate the desire to, above all else, give up this inner secret, you meet the whole of you. And maybe this inner secret is this lower self in us, right? I don't know exactly what he's referring to here in this, but I think he is alluding to something here. If you cultivate this day in and day out and you mean it, you cannot feel lost, stagnant, or disharmonious with yourself or with others. If we cultivate our desire, to be real, to be our full, not hide anything from ourselves or anybody else. And he says there will be no anxiety, no befuddlement, no bitter hurt. All this can be avoided only with the simple procedure outlined here, meeting the whole of yourself without further hiding. So watch your evasions. Notice how busy you make yourself with other issues that have nothing to do with this great question. See how you would rather deal with inclement issues even within yourself. When you overlook telltale reactions and opportunities for clarification and liberation, you fail to use an important key. So there's some of that I'm not sure I fully follow, but I think he goes into now, there's another whole section of this lecture that I think we'll, go into and complete. He says, it is therefore important to remember the simple formula of taking hold of yourself instead of allowing yourself to be controlled by your negativity. And again, that's just to see it, acknowledge it, make a different choice inside, not control your negativity, right? And thereby compounding fear, guilt, and hopelessness. When you let your destructiveness control you, you move further and further away from that point within you where you can change without strain or unnatural exertion of control. It is up to you to change. Your life can be the most dynamic, rich, and blissful experience imaginable when you do not allow yourself to be a victim of your negativity and destructiveness. And here, I think is key too, is there's a difference between sort of feeling a victim of our negativity and destructiveness and being free of it or having it and taking responsibility for it, right? So simply declaring your vigorous intent not to let cowardice and fear defeat you will set those powers in motion that will bring you out of this trap. All your fears must then dissolve like fog in the sun. My dearest friends, the fear of your negativity and destructiveness is so heavy only because you believe that it is final and static. This might be the hidden inner parts that, we're afraid of meeting. Like a hard object made of an unchangeable substance. This fear is justified in a way, but differently from how you feel it, and justified only as long as you cling to it and allow yourself to be controlled by it. This fear of our negativity, right? And so I think there is a kind of vicious circle. We start to see our negativity and then we judge our negativity and we get afraid of that, and so then it just serves to cling to it. And then, so for that length of time, we can't come out of it when we're trapped and resisting our negativity and our negativity is resisting us, right? The negative and destructive substance you fear in yourself is unchangeable only as long as you do not wish to change it. Now, but I also say that we have to also not wish to get rid of it, right? From that place of that forcing current, we have to welcome it and be with it, right? And allow it to change, right? So the higher self is the desire to unfold and flourish, right? And so from that, we wish to change it. and we wish to give it freedom. We wish to, support it. And we see that the resistance itself suffers, right? So we only want to help it. And from that place, I think it moves a little differently as well as when we, like, we may fear and not wish to change it from an attachment, right? Or we may wish to change it and we're doing it again from that forcing current, and neither of those work. As long as you refuse to look at what is and to give up what is destructive, this, as all choices, must be honored. So this is where also the guide is saying, like our choices are really key. Free will is a big deal, and our own, how can we have self-responsibility? How can we learn if we don't, aren't allowed to choose and then discover the consequences? But once you choose for the positive alternative, whatever negativity exists in you no longer feels disastrous. And again, it's like choosing for it, not, like totally transforming yourself into it, right? So there's a difference here. So, but even once we make that choice, right, even the negativity within us that still exists is no longer feeling quite as disastrous. Because then you know that it is not final, no matter how bad it is. It does not seem so bad because you begin to understand its cause and effect. And again, we begin to see what it serves, why it's confused, why it wants that, right? This makes a drastic difference in your inner experience and climate and determines the course you take. And when you are willing to give it up, the worst is not 1/10 as hard to bear as a tiny imperfection that troubles you when the self keeps it secret and is unwilling to give it up. So what is bad about the secret hidden self is not the actual measure of badness, if there were such a thing, but the refusal to expose it, see it, and let go of it. Meditating on your intent to face it and give it up is an activity of the part in you that is available for self-determination at this moment. So through it, you will experience that there is absolutely nothing to fear. You must finally come face to face with that rich, forever renewed, and unchangeably wonderful part in yourself through which you vibrantly live in absolute self-trust. Here, all the limitations of life must dissolve. You will find the world such a wide place with so many possibilities of beautiful experience right here and right now. In this new widening of life, there are not just two alternatives, one falsely good and one falsely bad, or in fact, two bad ones. In this new reality, there are many beautiful alternatives. In reality, all good can be had. There is no fear of fulfillment because it supposedly becomes stale. That happens only when you keep a tight check on yourself. When you let go and vibrate unchecked in fearless expansion, fulfillment becomes a state of being in the now. It need not be feared as an end, nor does desire for all the good in creation need to be feared as a beginning without future, a beginning that will end either in disappointment or in a precarious fulfillment that you do not know what to do with or how to keep alive. Hence, oneness is established between the outer and the inner you. You give up the struggle between the outer and the inner you when there is no longer a secret that has to be guarded. Now it is up to you, all of you, to take this final step. Some of you have begun, and to these I say, do not let up. Renew forevermore your intent to unguardedly reveal yourself to yourself. Nothing needs to be hidden, feared, avoided. And to those who still struggle at this point, regardless of how long ago they started this pathwork, I say try it. Use the meditation I have suggested, mean it, and when you discover your fear, work on it. Expose it for what it really is. Stop denying it, for only then will you discover that there is nothing to fear, that all your distortions and contortions are useless. For being what you really are right now, even in your soul's most secret chamber, is so much better to bear than what you now inflict upon your psyche. My dearest friends, this lecture can indeed be a key if you find yourself stuck. If you are not, it will help you to make the phases that are to follow much easier. And so then he goes into a fairly deep question and answer here, but let me see, let's pause here and see how we're doing with the, his closure of the topic on that regular main lecture. Anybody comment?
Hi, Darlene. I have a question.
Huh?
I have a question, and I'm sorry, it may not be towards the closing, but he mentioned something about, if you, I don't exactly know what it was, but I'm going to paraphrase it, that, if you don't do a dive within, you you lose out on it, you become too far out. And recently I've been watching a lot of, crime shows. So my question is, when people commit these heinous crimes, could that explain that they're not connected to that divine spark that's in there, and they're just, acting or doing these things based on their egos, their desires, their emotions? Is that correct to assume?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he has many lectures on sort of the nature of evil, and it's a kind of numbness, but it begins with this self-alienation that this lecture is talking about, right? And so, and then, different people have different, stories behind it, but it is like they don't feel the possibilities, right? So, and they give in to their own negative intentionality and their own lower self, right? And they don't feel connected with the other, and I think kind of, identification with the dark part of their self, right? And that actually, feels powerful to them, or feels better than to be vulnerable, to be open, to be in this place that he's asking us to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Anybody else? Good question. So let's go to the Q&A, because I think it's a bit long, but I think it's worthwhile going to. So the question: for the longest time, I have had difficulties with meditation. Now that I have overcome some of them, the results have been nothing short of miraculous. I would like to ask what this miracle is. And he says, the miracle is a law of life that you just discovered. The law is that whatever concept you hold must manifest in your life. The truth of life, the reality of life, is unlimited good. To the extent you can embrace this possibility, even in an attitude of honest questioning, to that extent, this truth, in whatever area you conceive it, must unfold itself to you. This unfolding of goodness appears miraculous to the person who has hitherto embraced only negative possibilities and therefore could not see beyond them. One's concept and expectations of life are fences around the possibilities of experience and unfoldment. When more possibilities are discovered, the fences recede accordingly. The greater the scope of the mind to grasp blissful, joyful experience, the more capacity we have, right? The more of it must come into being, because in reality, it is all there, available in unimaginable abundance. The narrow fences are always a result of personal distortion. You cannot experience more than what you conceive of the possibility of experience. If you believe that happiness is impossible, how can you experience happiness? This is logical as any physical law. For instance, if you move your body from here to there, and your body can only be at the spot you have moved it to, not at any different spot. This is no more and no less miraculous than the laws of the mind. As far as you can move it, this is where you find yourself with it. If you find yourself in a dingy, narrow little room, you need not remain there. You cannot conceive yourself of this fact unless you walk out of it and discover that there are a lot of nicer places outside this little room. If you resist any attempt to help you out of it on the grounds that maybe there is no other room or space for you, you cannot come out regardless of how long you argue about it. You must make the actual move. This is what you must do with your mind. When you discover that the room actually exists, it will appear miraculous. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, you so often remain in a dingy little hole with no possibility to stretch, to unfold, to experience beauty. You know, we think that that little room is all there is, right? And we've identified solely with that part. And when you finally test it and discover the beautiful world outside the room and see how safe and satisfying it is, you experience it as a miracle. You then stretch your mind to more and more possibilities to unfold and experience good, to give and receive good. That is the miracle of creation, as natural as you're moving from one place to another. As long as your limbs are healthy, that possibility is given to you, and you have allowed your limbs to atrophy too long by unnecessary incarceration. Through exercise and treatment, they will heal. This is what you do with your psyche after it has lived too long in a climate of negativity, limitation, and isolation because of your misguided fear of yourself. Once this limitation is given up, the miracle must come to each and every creature in the universe. It is as logical a law as any law you no longer find miraculous. The reality of creation is that there is unlimited freedom and possibility for experiencing the good. That possibility is given to everyone. The healing of the limbs of your psyche to take advantage of that unlimited freedom and possibility was the topic of the very lecture I just gave. Giving up the frantic struggle to guard your secret inner chamber. As long as you struggle to keep your secret, you cannot experience the wide open possibilities of living and of your innermost being. And now I'm hearing this inner, secret is really the secret of our higher being, our real self at some level, right? I beg of you, do not close your eyes to the fact that you struggle against exposing the secret part of you. Understand that this struggle is a useless pain you inflict upon yourself and that you can get rid of today if you so desire. So if I'm willing to, expose all of me, right, then I also will be more of a witness to the divine in me, and yes, I will be a witness to that which is not divine, but it also, in that process, can be made divine. With these words, bless all of you, my friends. With these blessings, I give you greater strength to activate the resources within you that will help you in your efforts. Go on, do not let up in this beautiful, deeply meaningful, and rewarding undertaking. Do everything possible in this direction. Realize that the area you most fear and are unwilling to see is the one you most need to focus on and where you will feel most rewarded and liberated. The freedom and safety you will experience cannot be conveyed in words. These are not empty promises. Those of you who have experienced to some degree the truth of what I say, please help those who are momentarily stuck in a state of denial and limitation. Those who are stuck, please do not separate yourself from those of your friends who can help you overcome the hurdle. Do not be too proud, even if they outwardly have not done this work for as long a time or are less knowledgeable. Please help each other. You will not regret it. Much help can thus be exchanged. Be in peace. Know how wonderful is the peace of truth by not shirking this truth. Be in God. Okay, any final comments? I like that part about miracles, and understanding that they're just, again, I think it's what you were saying, Dominique, it's just this invitation to be all of ourselves, feel all of our feelings, be intimate and accepting of whatever is here. And even like you said, Dick, even accepting of your unacceptance, right? Of the judger.
There's something really freeing when I think of it in terms of this feelings that we're having are the point of our being here. Like this is what we came to feel. So it's like, oh, when we hit up against the hardness, it changes everything because it's like, oh yeah, this is here it is. Versus like, let me look away.
Right. Exactly. And that's where I always feel like, you know, the guide gives us this life-giving story that says to us, you know, you carry these places that are difficult or that are painful or that where you suffer, you know, but that doesn't make you bad. That doesn't make you a failure. That doesn't make you, you know, it makes you, he says, what dignity it gives you to understand that you bring these things in to this plane for that very purpose of activating the higher self within you, you know, to free yourself of the lower self, and they kind of go hand in hand, right? You know, the more higher self we free, the more lower self is released, the more, you know, the lower self is released, the more higher self we're connected to. So, you know, it's like this is the work. Exactly. Okay, well, did everybody make it through with us most of the way? I see Joyce still. And any last comments here as we?
A challenging lecture and a good one. And thank you again, Darlene. You know, wonderful presentation and reading and sharing. Thanks. I appreciate everybody and thank you.
Yeah, everybody, good comments, good, you know, good discussion. Thank you. Okay, good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.
You.
Night.
Thank
Good
you,
night, all.
darling.